The day HOA Karren nearly killed my mother started off like any other passive-aggressive Wednesday in Oak Ridge Estates, sunny, quiet, and one step away from a lawsuit. I was elbow-deep in a busted garbage disposal when my phone buzzed with our home security alert. Front porch motion. That wasn't unusual. We had a ring cam because of the HOA's habit of random yard inspections. I wiped my hands on a towel and pulled up the live feed. There she was. Karren Ledford, HOA president, tyrant in caprice, and self-appointed queen of code violations. She was standing on our porch with her hands on her hips and a printed citation in one hand like it was a royal decree. Her lips were pressed together so tightly I thought she might implode. I sighed and headed to the door. "Morning, Karren," I said, opening it halfway. "Something wrong with the grass again?" She didn't even blink. "Mr. Paxton Hale, I've issued a citation for an unauthorized medical device visible through the front window. It creates an unsightly appearance and violates Aesthetic Article 7, Section 4. I blinked. "You mean the oxygen concentrator?" "For my mother." She nodded like she'd caught me hiding a meth lab. My mother, Miriam Hale, was 78 and had advanced COPD. She moved in with me last year after a bad fall, and her oxygen machine sat next to her recliner in the living room, right by the window. It hummed quietly, barely noticeable. But apparently Karren had been prowling the sidewalks again. "You're out of your mind," I said flatly. "It's a medical device. You can't fine me for that." Karren raised her chin. "As president of the HOA, it is my duty to maintain the visual integrity of this neighborhood." "The board agrees." "There's no way the board even saw it," I cut in. "You peeked through my window, didn't you?" Her nostrils flared like a bull. "I don't have to stand here and be insulted." "Good," I said, and shut the door in her face. I walked back inside just in time to hear Mom coughing from the living room. The oxygen machine hissed softly beside her, the green light steady. She gave me a thumbs up. "Was that the prune from next door?" "Yeah, she's on another power trip. Tell her I said she can put her citation where the sun don't shine." I chuckled and sat down next to her. "Already did." I thought that would be the end of it. But Karren Ledford wasn't the type to take a door in her face lightly. 2 days later, I came home from work to find the power to the living room was dead. Not just the lights, everything. The lamp, the TV, and most importantly, Mom's oxygen machine. She was slumped in her chair, gasping, her emergency tank barely hissing. I sprinted across the room, grabbed the backup tank, and twisted the valve open. The oxygen hissed louder. Her breathing evened out slowly, but my hands were shaking. What happened?" she rasped. "I don't know," I said, my voice tight. "Stay calm. I've got you." I checked the breaker box. Everything looked fine except for the living room's switch. It had been flipped. I moved it back. Power surged back on. The concentrator lit up. I checked the security footage next. At exactly 1:30 p.m., Karren walked up to our house with a clipboard and a smug little grin. She glanced around, then disappeared around the side of the house. Not even 2 minutes later, the power to the living room cut out. We had a utility box on the side of the house accessible if you knew where to look. The footage didn't show her flipping any switches, but she was definitely in the right place at the right time. I saved the footage. I labeled it. I backed it up into 3 drives. I wasn't about to let this go. The next morning, I marched straight into the Oak Ridge County Sheriff's Office with a copy of the footage and filed a report. Reckless endangerment of a vulnerable adult. The deputy took one look at the video and raised his eyebrows. "You said this lady is HOA? President of it," I said. "She's been harassing us for months." "This time she crossed the line. She cut power to an oxygen machine," he muttered. "That's not just harassment. That's criminal negligence at minimum." They opened an investigation that day. That night, Karren showed up on my doorstep again, this time with 2 other HOA board members in tow. One was Rick, a nervous bald guy who never made eye contact. The other was Maureen, who always looked like she regretted every choice in life. Karren didn't bother with pleasantries. "Paxton," she said, arms crossed, "we understand you've filed a police report against me." "That's a very serious accusation." "So is cutting off someone's oxygen," I said. You want to explain why you were snooping around my power box? It was a routine inspection, she said quickly. I was checking for unauthorized exterior modifications. Maybe the power outage was a coincidence. Sure, I said, and maybe Pig's Fly commercial. Karren's mouth twitched. Look, the board is willing to drop the citation if you withdraw the report. Rick and Maureen looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I leaned against the doorframe. You think this is about a citation? This is about you putting my mother's life at risk. Karren's smile vanished. You don't know who you're messing with. I laughed. Neither do you. And with that, I shut the door again. By the end of the week, things were spiraling fast. A detective showed up to examine the power box. He confirmed it had been tampered with. A screwdriver had been used to open the panel, and there were fresh scratches on the breaker switch inside. It wasn't something that could have happened by accident. Meanwhile, word started to spread. Neighbors began calling me quietly at first. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Karren had harassed. One couple had been fined for a misaligned mailbox. Another had been forced to repaint their house twice because she didn't like the shade of beige. But cutting power to a medical device? That hit differently. People started talking, whispering at first, then openly. And Karren? She was starting to sweat. I saw her pacing on her porch one night, phone glued to her ear, barking into it like a cornered dog. For the first time since she crowned herself queen of the HOA, she didn't look untouchable. She looked scared. And that was before the district attorney called me back. Detective Alvarez called me back the following Tuesday. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. She lied, he said, flat and direct. We pulled her phone records. At the exact time she was at your utility box, she called a board member and said, quote, that ought to shut him up. I leaned against the kitchen counter, heart hammering. That's enough, right? That's intent. It's enough for the DA to move forward. They're filing charges for criminal tampering and reckless endangerment of a dependent adult. I'm just giving you the heads up. I glanced into the living room. Mom was asleep, the oxygen machine humming steadily. I didn't say anything for a moment. Has she been arrested yet? She will be by this evening. We'll pick her up quietly. But it wasn't quiet. I was pulling into the neighborhood from the grocery store when I saw two sheriff's cruisers parked across from Karren's colonial-style house. Her front door was wide open. A deputy stood on the porch, speaking calmly into a radio. The other was leading Karren down the steps, one hand gently holding her elbow. She wasn't going quietly. Her voice was shrill, echoing across the cul-de-sac. I am the president. You can't do this. I have rights. I am acting in the interest of the community. A few neighbors had stepped onto their lawns with folded arms and unreadable expressions. I parked and got out as she caught sight of me. This is your fault, Paxton. You think you've won? This neighborhood is going to fall apart without me. I didn't respond. I just watched as they placed her into the cruiser. The door shut. The vehicle pulled away. The HOA board called for an emergency meeting 2 days later. They sent out notices through the community app and taped flyers to mailboxes. Most people didn't bother reading them anymore, but this time curiosity won out. The incident had gone from whispers to full-fledged backyard discussions. I showed up early and sat in the back of the clubhouse, near the exit. The room filled fast. Lawn chairs scraped the floor. People brought folding stools and leaned against walls. No one laughed. No one chatted. Rick, the acting vice president, stood behind the podium looking like he'd just walked into traffic. His tie was crooked. Sweat beaded at his temples. Thank you for coming, he said, voice cracking slightly. As many of you are aware, Karren Ledford has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Someone muttered, she's in jail? Rick cleared his throat. Temporarily, yes. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Is it true she cut off someone's medical equipment? Due to the legal nature of the matter, I can't confirm details, Rick said. But the board takes this very seriously. We're committed to transparency and restoring trust. A man near the back stood up. She fined me last month because my kids' bikes were visible through the garage window. You gonna refund that? Rick opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Maureen, who had taken over as secretary. She avoided eye contact. I raised my hand. Rick's eyes widened slightly. Yes, Mr. Hale. I stood. I have evidence of the incident. I filed it with the sheriff's department. I'm not here to rehash it. But I think this neighborhood should ask itself how someone like Karren got this much power in the first place. There was a ripple of murmurs. I continued. HOAs aren't supposed to be kingdoms. They're supposed to serve the community, not control it, not weaponize rules, not punish people for needing medical care or having beige paint that's not beige enough. We let this happen because we didn't push back. An older man in the second row nodded. She fined me for having a bird feeder. Said it attracted non-native species. Someone behind him said, she threatened to tow my truck because it had a small dent. And just like that, the floodgates opened. People started standing up, one after another. Stories tumbled out. Absurd fines. Unannounced inspections. Threats of liens over mailbox heights. Someone mentioned she once tried to ban wind chimes because they disrupted the harmony of the neighborhood's soundscape. Rick held up his hands. Please, please, one at a time. But Maureen stood up. She looked tired. Not just from the meeting from years. I voted with her more times than I can count, she said quietly. She intimidated us. Said if we didn't go along, she'd have us removed. I'm not proud of it. But I'm done. There was a long silence. Then a woman in the back asked, can we dissolve the board? Rick looked panicked. It's not that simple. I stepped forward. Actually, it is. I've been reviewing the HOA bylaws. If a third of the homeowners sign a petition, we can call for a special election to dissolve or restructure the board. We can even vote to amend the bylaws and limit presidential powers. The room went still. Then someone said, where's the petition? I pulled it from my jacket and unfolded it. Over the next hour, people lined up to sign. Some brought their spouses. Others went home and came back with neighbors. By the end of the meeting, I had 87 signatures. We needed 74. Rick didn't say much. He just sat there, rubbing his forehead. The next morning, I filed the petition with the HOA's legal counsel and scheduled the election date. It was official. That afternoon, I got a call from Assistant District Attorney Layla Santos. We're moving forward with charges, she said. We're adding unlawful interference with critical infrastructure and abuse of authority in a position of trust. She's looking at serious time. I didn't say anything. She's lawyered up, Santos added. But her attorney's already trying to negotiate a plea. If she pleads guilty, we'll push for restitution and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. Good, I said. That's not enough, but it's a start. She paused. And your mother? How's she doing? She's tougher than all of us, I said. She's more upset that Karren used a fake hydrangea policy to make her remove the planter from the porch. Santos laughed softly. I've read the bylaws. There's no hydrangea policy. Exactly. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood shifted. People started talking to each other again. Real conversations. Someone organized a block party, first one in years. Kids played in driveways without parents worrying about rogue citations for sidewalk chalk. A couple down the street built a new wheelchair ramp in front of their grandma's house. No one complained. On the night of the special election, we held it in the same clubhouse Karren once ruled like a despot. Ballots were counted in the open with 3 volunteers watching. I didn't run for the board, but I helped write the new charter. It included term limits, mandatory transparency hearings, and a rule that any citation involving a medical necessity had to be reviewed by a third-party mediator. Karren's house went on the market 3 weeks later. She tried to fight the charges, but there were too many witnesses. Too much evidence. The plea deal she eventually took included probation, mandatory community service at the local elder care center, and a 5-year ban from holding any community leadership role. She left while the neighborhood slept. A moving truck rolled in before sunrise. No one waved goodbye. Mom watched from the porch, sipping tea. She said nothing until the truck turned out of the subdivision. Well, she said, it's finally quiet. I nodded. You want your hydrangeas back? She smiled. Let's plant a whole row. 2 months after the election, Oak Ridge Estates didn't just feel different, it breathed differently. The air wasn't heavy with suspicion anymore. Lawns still looked good, but now they were good because people cared, not because they feared a notice slipped under their windshield wipers. The new board, led by a schoolteacher named Nadine who wore tie-dye and drove a Prius with a cracked bumper, held meetings that actually invited discussion. Not the illusion of it, real talk, real listening. I attended the first few, mostly out of curiosity and a lingering sense of duty. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. But trouble has a way of lingering in the corners even after you shine a light. One Thursday morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was low, tense, and spoke fast. "You don't know me," the man said. "But I worked maintenance for the HOA under Karren. I saw what she did the day she came to your house." I didn't say anything, just waited. She told me to turn off power to the utility box on the side. Said it was routine compliance. I didn't know it was tied to medical equipment. I swear. But after all that happened, I couldn't sleep. I'm calling now because there's more. Things she buried. Financial stuff. The line crackled. I stepped onto the back porch, away from the kitchen where Mom was humming along with the radio. "Why now?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because the county subpoenaed the HOA's records last week. I got a call from a detective asking if I ever noticed anything off. And yeah, I did. A lot, actually. I never said anything because she made people sign NDAs. But those aren't worth much if they were signed under false pretenses." I jotted down his name and the detective's contact. He hung up after that, nervous but relieved, like someone slipping out of a burning building. The next day, I drove to the county records office. I didn't expect to find much, maybe a few strange invoices, some unexplained expenses, but what I found made my skin crawl. There were almost 50 checks issued over the last 3 years to a landscaping company that didn't exist. The address listed was a vacant lot in a different zip code. Amounts varied, sometimes 200, sometimes 2,000. All signed by Karren, with the board's approval stamps applied digitally. But here's the thing, the board never voted on those. Not once. I took photos of everything. Got copies. I drove straight to the DA's office and handed them over. Layla Santos met me in the lobby herself. "Where did you get all this?" she asked, flipping through the stack. "Public records," I said. "But it gets better. The guy who did maintenance? He says Karren told him to cut the power that day, and that she used fake companies to launder HOA funds." Layla didn't even flinch. "We already suspected something like this. The county audit flagged irregularities. But this is direct evidence. We'll add fraud and conspiracy. She's in deeper than she realizes." When I left the building, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like I'd put another brick in the wall that needed building. 3 weeks later, subpoenas went out to every bank account Karren had touched. Her lawyer filed a motion to suppress, claiming harassment. The judge denied it in under 48 hours. The community found out soon enough. Not from gossip this time, but from the notice pinned to the clubhouse bulletin board. The HOA was officially a victim under a criminal embezzlement case. Nadine called an emergency meeting. This time, the purpose wasn't to panic. It was to regroup. "We've discovered that over $80,000 were funneled into shell companies," she said, holding up printouts of audit reports. "That's money that should have gone to sidewalk repairs, park upgrades, insurance. Instead, it's gone. We're cooperating fully with investigators." Someone in the crowd asked, "Can we get it back?" "If the court orders restitution," Nadine said, "yes. But it'll take time. And likely we'll only see a portion." Another voice, this one sharp and angry, "She stole from us." No one argued. I stayed after the meeting. Nadine approached me while stacking chairs. "You were the first person to push back. This whole thing, the accountability, the arrest, the audit, it started because you didn't let it go." I shook my head. "It started because Karren thought she could do anything she wanted. I just happened to be in her way. She tried to silence a sick woman," Nadine said, voice low. "And now we know she was stealing too. It makes you wonder what else she did." That question would be answered sooner than anyone expected. 2 months into the fraud investigation, a sealed envelope arrived at the DA's office. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside was a USB drive and a hand-scrawled note. "She made me fake permits." The drive contained dozens of scanned documents, permits, inspection approvals, contractor bids, all signed digitally using the same forged signature from the treasurer who had resigned 2 years ago. The permits were tied to vendor jobs that had never happened. Most damningly, there were emails between Karren and someone listed only as MG discussing how to push through the backdated compliance notices to justify the expenses. Layla called me again. "She used fake fines to create paper trails," she said. "Fined people, claimed it was for repairs or compliance, then pocketed the money through fake contractors. Some of it was cash payments she demanded directly. Couldn't believe it. People paid her in cash? Afraid of liens, Layla said. Or too tired to argue. We've identified at least 11 residents who handed over envelopes. One woman wrote a check and never got a receipt. The fraud charges ballooned. The grand jury expanded. Karren's plea deal was revoked. The DA's office filed to prosecute for racketeering under state law, a charge that carried serious prison time and asset seizure. She was re-arrested without bail. I didn't go to the hearing, but I read the transcript. Her lawyer argued she had acted under stress and had misunderstood her fiduciary role. The judge didn't even let him finish before denying bond. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began healing in earnest. A group of retired engineers volunteered to inspect every sidewalk and drain the HOA had neglected. Teenagers repainted the park benches. Someone found an old community garden plan buried in a shed, and within 2 weeks, raised beds were popping up next to the tennis court. Mom started teaching watercolor to kids on Saturdays. She didn't use the oxygen machine quite as much anymore. Her health was stable, but she still kept it close. Just in case. One afternoon, as we planted tomatoes in the backyard, she looked up and said, "You think she ever thought she'd get caught?" "No," I said. "People like that rarely do. They believe they're owed something. That rules only exist for other people." She nodded slowly. "Well, turns out they exist for her too." They did. Karren Ledford was convicted on 7 felony counts: racketeering, wire fraud, falsifying public records, endangerment, and embezzlement among them. She was sentenced to 17 years and ordered to pay over $100,000 in restitution. Prosecutors proved she'd laundered HOA funds through fake companies and had used her authority to silence dissent. The state revoked her notary license, HOA certification, and community management credentials. A civil suit followed, filed by the new HOA board, seeking damages for the stolen funds and breach of fiduciary duty. Her assets were frozen. Her name was removed from all community documents. Legally, she was no longer permitted to step foot in Oak Ridge Estates. But even if the system hadn't barred her, she wouldn't have dared. Because we remembered. Because we'd seen what happened when one person decided that power meant permission. And because this time the neighborhood had learned how to stand. The first time I saw Karren in a jumpsuit, she was standing in a courtroom, shackled at the wrists, staring straight ahead like she was trying to pretend none of us were real. The trial had drawn media attention. Not national, but big enough that a few local outlets set up cameras outside the courthouse. The headline most of them ran with was, "HOA president accused of racketeering, endangering elderly resident." They said her name with the same tone you'd use for a fallen politician or a coach who bet against his own team. I wasn't called to testify until the 3rd day. While waiting, the DA's office put me in a small room with pale green walls and a table that had been carved up by 1,000 bored fingernails. I sat across from Layla Santos, flipping through the folder of evidence she'd built over months. "She's still claiming the power outage was a coincidence," I said. "She can claim the moon is made of fondue," Layla replied. "But we've got timestamps, wire transfers, forged board approvals, and a maintenance tech who flipped faster than a pancake at a diner." I looked through the statements. One from a woman named Teresa who'd paid Karren cash for a compliance fee after being threatened with a lien over a compost bin. Another from a widower who'd been fined for excessive morning decorations on his porch after his wife passed. Karren had demanded he take down the wreath within 48 hours. "She really went after everyone, didn't she?" I said. Layla closed her binder. Power makes people bold. A little unchecked authority, and suddenly someone thinks they're above the law. When I took the stand, Karren didn't look at me. She didn't even flinch as I described finding my mother gasping for air while the oxygen machine sat dark and lifeless. I explained the security footage, the power box, the scratches on the breaker, and the way she tried to bargain with me afterward. But when the prosecutor played the audio from her phone call that ought to shut him up, something shifted in the room. People sat straighter. The jury leaned forward. And for the first time since this whole thing began, Karren glanced in my direction. Just once. No words. No expression. But it was enough to see that the wall she'd built around herself had started to crack. By the end of the week, The jury handed down a unanimous verdict on all counts. Guilty. The judge, a lean man with a clipped voice and no tolerance for theatrics, didn't delay sentencing. Karren Ledford, he said, you used your position to exploit, intimidate, and endanger the very people you were entrusted to serve. You operated a fraudulent scheme under the guise of community management, and in doing so, you threatened lives and violated public trust. I sentence you to 17 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 12. You will pay restitution totaling $123,000 and you are permanently barred from holding any administrative or fiduciary role in any residential or civic organization. She still didn't speak, just stared at the floor, silent as the bailiff led her away. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps next to Layla as the local press snapped photos and barked questions. I ignored them. I wasn't there for headlines. I was there to make sure it ended. Later that evening, Nadine called an emergency session at the clubhouse, not a crisis meeting, but a celebration of sorts. Residents brought lawn chairs and coolers, and someone passed around lemonade in mason jars. We're not toasting the fall of a tyrant, Nadine said, standing beneath the old oak tree that shaded the clubhouse entrance. We're celebrating a neighborhood that stood up and said, enough is enough. We faced corruption, abuse of power, and threats to our safety, and we didn't back down. People clapped, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from the chest. The kind that means something. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Plain envelope, thick paper, no return address. Inside was a typed note. You don't know me, but I watch what you did. I've lived here for 22 years. I thought things would never change. Thank you for proving me wrong. M. I folded the note and put it in the drawer next to my tools. Weeks passed. The garden beds flourished. Someone installed a free little library between the tennis court and the duck pond. The streets felt softer somehow, like the asphalt itself had exhaled. Mom started sleeping with the windows open again. She said the air felt lighter. One afternoon, while we were replacing a section of fence in the backyard, she paused and looked at me. What are you going to do now? I shrugged. Keep living here. Keep fixing stuff. Maybe help Nadine write some better community policies. She handed me a screwdriver. You ever think about running for council? City, not HOA. You've got a head for this kind of thing. I laughed. I think I've had enough politics for a lifetime. She didn't press. But a few weeks later, someone did. A former board member who'd kept a low profile during the whole ordeal stopped by the house with a clipboard and a coffee. He asked if I'd consider joining a citizen oversight committee being formed by the city council, something to help monitor how HOAs operate across the county. You're one of the few people who's actually gone toe-to-toe and come out the other side, he said. We need people like that. I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no either. Instead, I spent the next few days walking the neighborhood, talking to people, listening. Some were still cautious. Others were eager to help rewrite the rules that had once been used against them. I finally said yes the following Monday. The committee met monthly. We worked with legal consultants to draft new oversight guidelines. We created a hotline for anonymous complaints. We pushed for state-level changes to how HOA boards could operate, demanding transparency and limiting unilateral authority. And we won. By the end of the year, the State House passed a bill enforcing stricter regulation and requiring independent audits for any HOA handling more than $50,000 annually. Karren's face wasn't mentioned, but everyone in Oak Ridge Estates knew who inspired the law. We called it the Hale Act. Mom cried when she saw the news on TV. I pretended not to notice. One night, as summer slipped into fall, we sat on the porch watching the breeze flip through the leaves. You know, she said, when I moved in with you, I figured the biggest battle we'd face would be learning to share a kitchen again. I still say you hoard the hot sauce, I replied. She laughed. And I still say you put nails in the junk drawer. We didn't talk about Karren much anymore. Not because we'd forgotten, but because we didn't need to. She wasn't a shadow hanging over the neighborhood anymore. She was a cautionary tale, a name in a file, a chapter that had ended. Now, when we talked about Oak Ridge, we talked about the little free library and the garden beds and the kid who started painting murals on the sidewalk with permission. We talked about what could be built when people stopped being afraid of their own front yards. The neighborhood didn't need a queen. It needed a conscience. And this time it had one.